Everything turned out kind of stupid. Alaric came home from work. Isolde was sitting at the computer. Hearing him take off his shoes, she came out of the room into the kitchen and said, "Sit down for dinner." "And what about you?" he asked. "I already had dinner. Maybe I'll eat something later." Alaric had a snack in the city and decided he'd also eat later. Isolde told him, "I'm going to the bathroom to dye my hair. It'll take about 40 minutes. "All right, I'll find something to do," Alaric replied. He went into the room where the computer was. Isolde had hurried out and hadn't turned it off properly. Or maybe, due to some open windows, the system didn't shut down. It had been malfunctioning like that for a while. Alaric had planned to invite a friend over on the weekend to fix the computer and perhaps reset the system. But one of the open windows caught his attention. After activating the system, he noticed multiple emails, all addressed exclusively to his wife, Isolde. This made him pause. It already looked quite unpleasant. Alaric decided to read the entire correspondence, starting from the very first email, which was sent months ago. Understanding that his wife could catch him reading her private messages at any moment, Alaric inserted a flash drive into the computer and copied everything. Once the copying was complete, he hid the flash drive in his pocket and began reading the emails. As he read through the messages, Alaric realized that Isolde's affair with Bastian had started recently, about 3 months ago. Isolde had gone on a business trip to a city about an hour and a half away by plane. But judging by the correspondence, nothing had happened between them during that trip. Bastian was married and had children. What surprised Alaric the most was that, despite this emotional affair, Isolde's attitude toward him hadn't changed. However, they were discussing plans to meet again. Isolde, knowing her husband's travel schedule, suggested they meet in their city. She informed Bastian that her husband would be away for 2 or even 3 days. In his responses, Bastian wrote about his wife and children, emphasizing that their affair shouldn't harm either of their families. He even attached some of his photos to the emails. Alaric lost his appetite and didn't have dinner. When Isolde finished in the bathroom, he took a shower, and while she ate alone, he went to the bedroom and lay down, pretending to sleep. In reality, he lay there with his eyes closed, thinking about his next steps. The next morning, Alaric got up earlier than his wife, quickly had breakfast, and rushed to work. There, he intercepted Cedric, the company's programmer and a close friend, and gave him a task. Alaric wanted to see his wife's correspondence in real time, mirrored directly on his phone. He provided Cedric with all the necessary data. Within an hour, Alaric could see Isolde's emails on his phone. After carefully studying the correspondence, Alaric devised a plan. He wanted revenge. He found a link Bastian had shared in the emails to his blog. After browsing it, Alaric discovered that Bastian's wife, Elowen, was among his friends. With this information, Alaric began setting his trap. He spoke to his boss, who agreed to play along, and told Isolde in advance that he was going on a business trip. He even bought plane tickets for a round trip. Upon arriving at the airport, Alaric waited for about an hour and a half before flying back home on the next available flight. He knew from the emails that Bastian would be on the same outbound flight. For the first time in years, Isolde insisted on driving him to the airport for his business trip. She explained her reason as wanting to take the car back home so it wouldn't sit at the airport. Alaric boarded the plane. There, luck was on his side. Bastian ended up seated right next to him. It was hot, so they took off their jackets and started talking. Seizing the moment, Alaric secretly turned on his voice recorder, which he often used for work. During the conversation, Alaric casually asked, "Are you flying to the big city for work?" Bastian smiled and replied, "Not exactly. I need to unwind. 3 months ago, I was at a seminar in this city and noticed a pretty woman on the last day. Unfortunately, I missed my chance back then, but we kept in touch, and now she told me her husband is going away for 3 days, so I thought, why not? She'll pick me up from the airport and we'll go to a hotel." Alaric clenched his teeth but kept his composure. "Isn't that risky, meeting in her own city?" he asked. Bastian shrugged. "It is, but she's willing to take the risk. Plus, I told my wife I was on a business trip. She believes me. I even packed all the right paperwork." Alaric probed further. "Do you love your wife?" "Of course, but a man needs some fun now and then. Besides, I have a little secret trick. A friend from America gave me some drops. He called them the Danish King's Drops. 5 drops in a drink, and any woman will be putty in your hands," Bastian said with a smug grin. The plane landed. As they disembarked, Bastian received a message from Isolde confirming she was waiting for him at the arrivals area. "There she is," Bastian said. "I'll introduce you." But Alaric had planned for this moment. As they approached the arrivals hall, Alaric purposely lagged behind, letting Bastian go ahead. He watched as Isolde ran up to Bastian, hugging him tightly. Alaric walked up to them unnoticed, took the keys from Isolde's handbag, and cleared his throat. Both froze when they saw him. "Isolde," Alaric said coldly, "when he gives you drinks, watch carefully what he adds." "And you," he turned to Bastian, "you said nothing would happen, but it did. She's your Isolde, right? Well, now she's not. Isolde, you're not coming home. I'll pack your things and leave them in the hallway tomorrow afternoon. Don't bother coming back tonight." He walked away without looking back. Isolde tried to call after him, but he ignored her. Bastian stammered, "So? That was your husband?" "Yes," Isolde replied, tears welling up. "And now?" Bastian asked nervously. "I need to save my marriage. You need to save yours too," she said, turning away. Alaric drove away from the airport, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of adrenaline, rage, and a deep sense of betrayal washing over him. He had done it. He had caught them red-handed. Yet the satisfaction he had expected to feel was absent. Instead, an unbearable emptiness settled within him. He continued driving in silence, the weight of everything sinking in deeper with each passing minute. Alaric's mind raced, replaying the scene at the airport over and over again. Isolde's shocked face, Bastian's awkward stammering. It all felt surreal, like a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as waves of anger and sadness washed over him. When he finally reached his apartment, Alaric parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring blankly at the dashboard. The apartment now felt more like a battleground than a home. He stepped out of the car, walked into the building, and entered the apartment. The stillness inside was deafening. Without thinking, he went straight to the bedroom and began packing Isolde's belongings into bags. Clothes, shoes, personal items. All of it was thrown together without care. Each item felt like another reminder of her betrayal. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Cedric. "I sent all the files to Aloan. She read them. No reply yet." Alaric stared at the message for a few seconds before typing back, "Thanks. I really appreciate it." He put the phone down and continued packing. Meanwhile, across the city, Aloan sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, playing the video Cedric had sent. She watched in disbelief as Bastian embraced Isolde at the airport. Tears streamed down her face, her hands trembling. It wasn't the first time she had suspected Bastian of cheating, but seeing it with her own eyes broke something inside her. She wiped her tears and opened the email that contained the recorded conversation from the plane. Hearing Bastian talk so casually about his affair, about his tricks, about the Danish king's drops, made her stomach turn. She picked up her phone and called Bastian, but it went straight to voicemail. She didn't bother leaving a message. Back in Alaric's apartment, he finished packing Isolde's belongings and moved the bags to the hallway. He locked the apartment door and sat down on the couch, feeling utterly drained. His mind wandered to the years they had spent together. The laughter, the love, the promises. How had it come to this? He poured himself a glass of whiskey, took a long sip, and let the alcohol numb his thoughts. The next morning, Alaric woke up early, his head pounding from the whiskey the night before. He got dressed and went to work, though his mind wasn't on his tasks. Around lunchtime, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Aloan. "I saw everything. I'm filing for divorce. Thank you for telling me." Alaric typed back, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Stay strong." Her reply was simple, "You too." That evening, as Alaric was preparing to leave work, he noticed someone waiting by the parking lot. It was Isolde. She looked fragile, pale, tired, and hollow-eyed. Her hands clutched a small handbag as she nervously shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "Alaric," she called softly as he approached. He stopped a few feet away from her, his expression cold. "What are you doing here?" I needed to see you," she stammered. "We've already said everything we needed to," he replied flatly. Please just give me a minute, she pleaded, her eyes welling up with tears. Against his better judgment, Alaric sighed and gestured for her to speak. I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything we had. But I can't stop thinking about what I did. What I lost, she began, her voice trembling. It was a mistake, Alaric. I got caught up in something stupid. I never meant for it to go this far. He clenched his jaw. A mistake? Is that what you're calling it? Planning secret meetings, lying for months, flying out to meet him? That's not a mistake. That's a series of choices you made. You knew exactly what you were doing. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. And I regret it. I regret it more than anything. Alaric looked away, fighting the mixture of anger and sadness building inside him. Why? Why did you do it, Isolde? Was I not enough for you? She shook her head frantically. You were more than enough. It wasn't about you. It was me. I felt, I don't know, invisible. Bastion made me feel special again. It was stupid, and I see that now. But I swear, nothing physical happened. It was only emotional. Only emotional? Alaric snapped. You planned to sleep with him. You were waiting for me to leave town so you could be with him. Don't downplay this. She fell silent, unable to argue. I packed your things. They're in the hallway. Come get them whenever you want, Alaric said coldly. Please, Alaric, she begged. I love you. I know I messed up, but I'm willing to do anything to fix this. He shook his head. It's too late. Love isn't supposed to come with conditions, and trust once broken can't be rebuilt just because you say you're sorry. She stepped forward, her voice cracking. So, this is it? This is it, Alaric confirmed, turning away. Isolde stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her cheeks before finally walking away. Alaric didn't watch her leave. He couldn't. Over the next few weeks, Alaric tried to rebuild his life. The apartment felt emptier, but at least it was peaceful. He focused on work, spent time with Cedric and other friends, and tried to rediscover who he was outside of his failed marriage. Slowly, the weight began to lift, though the scars remained. One evening, as he sat on the balcony sipping a drink, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Alawan. The divorce is finalized. I'm moving to stay with my sister for a while. Thank you again for helping me see the truth. Alaric replied, I'm glad you're finding peace. Stay strong. Her final message read, You too. He put the phone down, leaned back in his chair, and let out a long breath. The worst was over, but healing would take time. At least now he could move forward, free of lies, free of betrayal, and, for the first time in a long while, free to start over. Days turned into weeks, and Alaric found himself slowly settling into a new rhythm of life. The emptiness of the apartment no longer felt as suffocating as it once had. The stillness, which had first been unbearable, now brought him a strange sense of peace. He spent his evenings walking through the city streets, reflecting on everything that had transpired. Sometimes he wondered if he had made the right decision, if there was even a chance at forgiveness. But deep down, he knew that trust, once shattered, could never be fully restored. One evening, as Alaric sat at his desk, going through old photos stored on his computer, he stumbled upon a folder labeled Holidays. It was filled with pictures of him and Isolde, smiling, laughing, holding hands as if they had been the happiest couple in the world. The images triggered a mix of emotions: sorrow, nostalgia, and anger. He clicked through them quickly, unable to linger too long on the faces that now seemed like strangers. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Cedric. Hey man, how are you holding up? Up for a drink tonight? Alaric hesitated before typing back, Yeah, I could use one. Usual place. You got it. See you in an hour, Cedric replied. An hour later, Alaric met Cedric at their favorite bar. The place was half empty, its dim lights and soft music providing a calm atmosphere. Good to see you, man, Cedric greeted, raising his glass. You too, Alaric replied, sitting down. They chatted casually for a while. Work, the weather, nothing heavy, before Cedric finally asked, Have you heard anything from Isolde? Alaric shook his head. Not a word since the last time I saw her. I think she got the message. Cedric nodded thoughtfully. And Elowen? How's she doing? She moved in with her sister. She texted me the other day. Says she's focusing on her kids and taking it one day at a time, Alaric replied. Cedric sighed, swirling his drink. It's crazy how fast things can fall apart. Yeah, Alaric agreed. One day you think you know someone, and the next, Cedric clinked his glass against Alaric's. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, Alaric echoed, taking a long sip. Back in another part of the city, Isolde sat in a small rented apartment, staring at her phone. She had written a dozen unsent messages to Alaric, each one more desperate than the last. But she never hit send. Deep down, she knew there was nothing she could say to fix what she had broken. Her life now felt like it was in pieces. She had lost everything: her marriage, her home, her sense of self. Regret gnawed at her constantly, the weight of her mistakes ever present. Her phone buzzed with a message from Bastian. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're okay. She stared at it for a long moment before deleting it. She didn't need his apologies. This was her burden to bear. A week later, Alaric received an unexpected email. It was from Elowen. Hi, Alaric. I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted to say thank you again for everything. I know it wasn't easy for either of us, but I'm glad we found the truth, even if it hurt. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize that sometimes the hardest endings bring the most important beginnings. Take care of yourself. Elowen. Alaric smiled slightly at her words. It was strange, the bond they had formed through shared betrayal. He replied briefly, wishing her well. For the first time in a long while, Alaric felt a sense of closure. The anger, the pain, the confusion. It was all still there, but it was no longer consuming him. The worst was over, and now he could truly begin to heal. That evening, as he stood on his balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he allowed himself to imagine a future. A future without Isolde, without the weight of betrayal, but filled with possibilities. He raised his glass to the setting sun and whispered, to better days. As the days turned into months, Alaric continued to rebuild his life. The pain that had once consumed him began to dull, leaving behind a scar, a reminder of what he had endured, but also proof of his strength. His routine became simpler. Work during the day, long walks in the evening, and occasional meetups with Cedric and other friends who had supported him through the worst of it. Slowly but surely, he was piecing himself back together. One cool autumn evening, as Alaric was walking through a park not far from his apartment, he noticed a small art exhibit set up along the pathway. He wasn't particularly interested in art, but something about the peaceful setting and the warm glow of the lights drew him in. As he wandered through the displays, he stopped in front of a painting depicting a man standing on a cliff, staring out over an endless ocean, his back turned to the viewer. There was something haunting about the loneliness in the image, yet also a sense of peace. Beautiful, isn't it? Came a soft voice from his right. Alaric turned to see a woman standing next to him, studying the painting. She had dark auburn hair, tied back in a loose braid, and deep-set green eyes that reflected the lights around them. Yeah, Alaric replied. It's quiet but powerful. The woman smiled. That's what I thought too. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. He nodded, feeling an unexpected comfort in the conversation. I'm Alaric, he said, extending his hand. She took it gently. Celine. They spoke for a few more minutes, exchanging casual thoughts about the exhibit, before Celine glanced at her watch. I should get going, but it was nice talking to you. Yeah, you too, Alaric replied. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled again. There's another exhibit opening next weekend. Maybe I'll see you there? I'd like that, Alaric said without overthinking it. Celine walked away and Alaric found himself standing there for a few more moments, watching the empty space where she had been. It was a small interaction, but it left a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Meanwhile, across the city, Isolde was still grappling with her new reality. The apartment she rented was small and cold, a constant reminder of how much she had lost. She had started therapy in an attempt to understand her actions and the self-destructive path she had chosen. Some days felt manageable, others unbearable. She still thought about Alaric every day, the way he looked at her at the airport, the disappointment in his eyes. She knew there was no going back, but part of her still wished she could somehow undo the damage. One evening, while scrolling through her phone, she stumbled upon old photos of them together, laughing, smiling, traveling, images from a life that now felt like someone else's. Tears welled up, but instead of spiraling into regret, she whispered to herself, "You need to let go." She deleted the photos one by one, feeling a strange mix of pain and relief. It was time to move forward, even if it meant doing so alone. The following weekend, Alaric found himself back at the art exhibit, hoping to see Celine again. As he walked through the displays, he felt a strange, nervous energy, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Then near the center of the exhibit, he saw her, examining a sculpture with the same thoughtful expression she had before. "Hey," he said, approaching. Celine turned, her face lighting up. "You made it." "Yeah, I figured I'd come back and see if the art was as good as last time," he joked. They spent the next couple of hours walking through the exhibit together, talking about art, life, and little things that didn't seem so little anymore. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people finding comfort in each other's company. As the evening drew to a close, Celine hesitated before saying, "There's a cafe nearby. I know it's late, but would you like to grab a coffee?" Alaric smiled. "I'd like that." They walked to the cafe together, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. For the first time in a long while, Alaric felt something that had been missing. Hope. Hope for a future that wasn't defined by betrayal or regret, but by new beginnings. As they sat at the cafe, sipping coffee and laughing over shared stories, Alaric realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments could lead to the most meaningful connections. He wasn't healed completely, not yet, but he was on the right path. And as Celine smiled across the table at him, Alaric knew that maybe, just maybe, life was giving him another chance at happiness. Over the next few weeks, Alaric and Celine continued to meet, each encounter feeling more natural, more comfortable, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. Their conversations were easy, filled with laughter, and devoid of the heavy baggage Alaric had been carrying for so long. With Celine, he found a sense of peace that had eluded him for months. They spent afternoons walking through parks, evenings at small art exhibits, and late nights talking over coffee in quiet cafes. Alaric was cautious at first, hesitant to open up fully, but Celine had a gentle way of drawing him out. She never pushed for details about his past, never asked about the pain he had clearly endured. Instead, she focused on the present, on who he was now, not who he had been. One evening, as they sat by the riverbank, watching the water reflect the city lights, Celine finally broke the silence that had settled between them. "You seem lighter now," she said softly. Alaric glanced at her, surprised. "Lighter?" She smiled, like someone who's been carrying something heavy for too long, but is finally starting to let it go. Alaric took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. "I guess I am. For a long time I felt trapped, stuck in this cycle of anger and regret. But being around you, it reminds me that there's more to life than what I lost." Celine reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. "You didn't lose everything, Alaric. Sometimes endings are just disguised beginnings." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in months, he felt a warmth that wasn't tinged with pain. A quiet moment passed between them, filled with unspoken words, before he leaned in and kissed her. Gentle, hesitant at first, but growing deeper as the barriers between them began to fall away. When they finally pulled apart, Celine smiled. "I was wondering when you'd do that." Alaric chuckled, a genuine, full laugh that felt foreign but welcome. "I guess I was just waiting for the right moment." Meanwhile, life for Isolde had taken a different path. After months of therapy and self-reflection, she had managed to stabilize her emotions. Though the guilt of what she had done still lingered, she was beginning to understand the reasons behind her choices, the emptiness she had tried to fill, the validation she had sought from others instead of herself. She had also found a new job, something simple, nothing grand, but it gave her purpose, a reason to wake up every morning. Slowly, she was rebuilding her life, though she often wondered about Alaric. She had thought about reaching out, about apologizing one last time, but she always stopped herself. Some wounds didn't need to be reopened. One day, while walking through a bookstore, she spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Her heart raced for a moment until she realized it wasn't Alaric, just someone who resembled him. Still, the encounter stirred something inside her, a recognition that life had moved on for both of them. She smiled faintly to herself, realizing that for the first time since their split, she didn't feel the crushing weight of regret. Back in Alaric's world, things with Celine continued to blossom. One weekend, they planned a small trip to a coastal town, away from the noise and chaos of the city. As they walked along the beach, waves lapping at their feet, Alaric found himself reflecting on how far he had come. "Do you ever think about the past?" Celine asked, skipping a stone across the water. "Sometimes," Alaric admitted, "but not in the same way I used to. Before, it was all I thought about. The hurt, the betrayal. Now, it feels like another life, like it happened to someone else." Celine turned to him, her eyes filled with understanding. "That's because you've healed, Alaric. It doesn't erase what happened, but it doesn't define you anymore." He took her hand, feeling the warmth in her fingers. "You've been a big part of that." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We all need someone to remind us that life keeps going, even when we think it's over." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Alaric felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile peace that came from avoidance, but a deeper, more profound acceptance of his journey. The heartbreak, the loss, the mistakes, and the growth. And as he stood there with Celine by his side, the ocean stretching endlessly before them, he realized that sometimes life's most painful endings led to the most beautiful beginnings. As Alaric and Celine stood together on the beach, the salty breeze gently tousling their hair, there was a calmness between them that neither had felt in a long time. The sound of the waves washing over the shore mirrored the quiet rhythm their hearts now followed, no longer weighed down by past regrets, but beating with a newfound sense of freedom and possibility. That evening, back at their small seaside inn, they sat on the porch, a bottle of wine between them. The moon cast a soft glow over the water, and for the first time since his marriage had ended, Alaric felt completely at ease. "Celine," he started, turning toward her, "I never thought I'd be able to feel this way again. After everything that happened, I thought I was done with love." Celine smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft moonlight. "We all think that after we've been hurt. It's like we forget that love isn't about perfection. It's about connection, about being brave enough to try again." He took a deep breath. "I've been carrying a lot of guilt, not just for how my marriage ended, but for how much I let it define me afterward. It's like I forgot who I was without it." "You're finding that person again," she said gently, resting her hand over his. "And I'm glad I get to be part of that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't necessary. The connection between them had grown deeper than either had expected, and it brought Alaric a strange mixture of peace and anticipation for what might come next. Meanwhile, back in the city, Isolde sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through her phone. Her life had stabilized. Therapy had helped. Her new job was steady. And though the loneliness lingered, it was no longer as sharp. But that evening, a strange sense of closure washed over her. She opened her journal, flipping through pages filled with reflections on her mistakes, her regrets, and her hopes for the future. It was then that she realized something profound. She didn't need Alaric's forgiveness to move on. She had spent so long believing that only his absolution could set her free. But the truth was, she had to forgive herself first. She picked up her phone and, after a moment of hesitation, typed out a message she never planned to send. "Alaric, I just wanted to say that I hope you found peace. I know I hurt you deeply, and for that, I'll always be sorry. But I also hope you found happiness again. Someone who sees you the way I should have. Thank you for the time we shared, and for teaching me, even through the pain, what I needed to learn." She stared at the message for a moment before deleting it. It wasn't for him. It was for her. Back at the seaside town, Alaric and Celine spent their last morning exploring the local market, buying trinkets and fresh pastries, before packing up and heading back to the city. The drive was quiet but comfortable, filled with the kind of silence that spoke of understanding rather than awkwardness. As they approached the city skyline, Alaric turned to Celine. "This weekend, it meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to me too, she replied. But you know, this doesn't have to end here. He smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. No, it doesn't. For the first time in a long while, Alaric didn't feel like he was holding on to the past. The wounds had healed, leaving behind scars that no longer stung, but served as reminders of his journey. The pain, the growth, and now, the hope. As he parked the car in front of Celine's apartment, she turned to him, her eyes soft. So what now? Alaric reached for her hand. Now we live. No expectations, no pressure. Just see where this takes us. She nodded, leaning in for a gentle kiss. I'd like that. Months later, Alaric found himself walking through the same park where he'd first met Celine. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Celine walked beside him, her hand intertwined with his, and life felt whole in a way it hadn't in years. They passed by an art exhibit, similar to the one that had first brought them together. Alaric stopped in front of a new painting, this one depicting a man and a woman standing side by side on a cliff, looking out at an endless horizon. He turned to Celine. It's funny, isn't it? How sometimes the worst moments in our lives bring us exactly where we need to be? Celine smiled, her eyes full of understanding. That's life, Alaric. It breaks us down just to rebuild us stronger. And with that, they continued walking, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. Not as broken people, but as two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected of ways.